In an hour, maybe two, you'll be dead. And moments later, you'll become one of them. You'll endanger your friends, try to kill them, probably succeed.
It's not every day that you craft a movie adaptation from a video game successfully. Thinking of the list of films based on video games, there are few that do well, let alone create a franchise that has spanned 6 movies over a dozen years. Resident Evil from 2002 did good enough box office business and gained a fan base, so it was no surprise that a sequel would be greenlit. The money talks to studios when making business decisions, and this situation was no different. As a fan of the games and of the first movie, I was excited to see where the story would take us, and how the hell Alice was going to survive her scary predicament at the end of the original. The games had a vast mythology with which to mine stories and ideas. In other words, this seemed like a no-lose scenario, especially with the audience already primed with the first film. Enter director Alexander Witt, tasked with making a sequel that would continue the franchise's success. The question is, would he be able to do it, or would Resident Evil Apocalypse get destroyed by fans as easily as Nemesis took out the Stars Squad? Let's get down to brass tacks. In this Why You Hate video, and by the way, I've done several episodes of films that sometimes divides the fans and causes great discussion for people on both sides of the fence. Check them out in the Why You Hate playlist if you haven't already, or if you're in need for some fun and a good horror discussion, check them out again. It's not going to hurt, I promise. So as I was saying, I'm going to go over some reasons why fans have issues with Resident Evil Apocalypse, including multiple things that I know will be a strong debate in this community for the lovers of this film and the detractors of it. I will also attempt, if at all possible, to show how some ideas might not hold as much weight as they seem. Also, I'll touch upon some history and behind-the-scenes info that give a snapshot of the film's journey. So get ready to get locked in Raccoon City with thousands of zombies, protect the daughter of the scientist that brought about the literal end of the world, become an action movie even though you're supposed to be a horror film, and never assume that you're safe because you're not. Here are the reasons why you hate Resident Evil Apocalypse. Number 1. Story. Paul W.S. Anderson first started writing the screenplay almost immediately after completing the first film. He bowed out of directing the sequel as he was busy with prepping Alien vs. Predator at the time. AVP, of course, has its own problems that we won't dive into right now, maybe some other time. During the screenplay development on the first film, there were some versions which skipped the story of the first game, and instead went with different storylines more similar to the Raccoon City events from sequels. One of the scripts had STAR's team being sent to Raccoon City and battling monsters and zombies created by the T-virus outbreak, and there was one which was written as more of a horror film with much darker tone and a lot of scenes more appropriate for low-budget horror, including way more graphic violence and gore and numerous nude scenes with female characters including Jill Valentine. Fans of the games were hoping for a movie that stayed faithful to the survival horror tone. Instead, they got a high-octane, explosion-laden action flick. While the first movie had its own deviations, Apocalypse leaned even further into Hollywood spectacle, leaving behind much of the atmospheric dread that made the games iconic. There were scenes that were so over the top that you almost forgot you were watching a film based off of a horror video game. Alice was taking out zombies with the ease and moves of Van Damme and Cynthia Rothrock combined.
Sheesh.
There's no denying that in general it made for exciting sequences, especially in a packed theater, but the trade-off between tense horror and spectacle would fuel division for years in sequels to come. Although never addressed specifically, the infection had already started since the events of the first film. As the Red Queen had stated, the virus can change form. During the time span between the two films, the virus has spread from the hive to the subterranean area of Raccoon City, apparently via the ventilation system, explaining how the undead rose from the cemetery. Another point never referenced in the films, the newspaper clippings in Jill Valentine's apartment. that say STARS operative Jill Valentine and others are on temporary suspension after a mission in the Arklay Mountains heavily implies that the mansion incident from the first Resident Evil game did happen in the film universe but was off-screen. This would explain how Jill knew so much about the zombies and the T-virus. No mention is made of Chris Redfield or other characters like Barry Burton and Albert Wesker, though they do eventually show up in the sequels. So the events took place, but the way they happened are drastically changed. The movie uses elements of the plots of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but ultimately Milla Jovovich was disappointed by this film. She said that the studio wanted more action and explosion, and that the story they wanted to craft was swept under the rug. Another gripe: the pacing. The movie barrels forward at breakneck speed, giving little time for character development or genuine suspense. Scenes that should be tense, like the team navigating through zombie-infested streets, are often rushed. When compared to other examples like 28 Days Later, The Walking Dead, etc., Resident Evil depicted these scenarios with much more ease, a possible aspect that makes the world seem less dangerous than they tried to illustrate. This trickles down on how the characters operate as well. Number 2. Characters. To prepare for her role, Sienna Guillory actually bought a PlayStation 1 console and a copy of the game to study the Jill Valentine character. She also based her movements of Jill by watching the way Jill moved in the game Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
You've got these two women who have this incredible, as minxy and sexy as Jill. It's just a great dynamic. Try to hit him in the head.
Sienna Guillory is a natural blonde, but to play the brunette, she had to dye her hair a dark brown and was cast on the strength of her performance in the TV movie Helen of Troy in 2003.
It's really liberating, actually, to have such a kind of sexy outfit. In most films, I'm like, no, don't dress her up sexy, because then she can't be sexy. You know, being sexy is not about looking sexy, it's a quality. It's not a look, but actually, it kind of works. You know, you watch playback and it's like, who's that fox? Oh yeah, the hair's great, and the makeup's great, and the costume's great. Oh my god, I'm inside that thing. Great, moving it around like a little toy.
Natasha Henstridge was also asked to play the role of Jill Valentine, but could not accept due to her other work commitments. She was also one of the actresses that was considered to play Jill in the first film when different scripts were being written for it, but like all the others, she too had a lot of problems with how graphic those were and the amount of nudity Jill had in each of the scripts. Supplemental material for Resident Evil 2 credited Henstridge's film Species as a source of inspiration for the games, particularly the male victim's death by inbreeding and female characters who mutate into grotesque but sexually attractive creatures. Sienna has a great presence and various memorable scenes as Jill. Unfortunately, as a fan favorite from the games, she is introduced as a tough-as-nails cop, but her character arc feels undercooked. Fans wanted more depth, but the film treats her more as a secondary character to Alice. Milla Jovovich returns as Alice and continues her story, but by this point she's less a survivalist and more of a superhero. Her abilities enhance strength, agility, and a knack for always surviving the impossible turned her into what some fans called Mary Sue-esque. It's not necessarily a problem for casual audiences, but for die-hard Resident Evil fans, it was a betrayal of the franchise's survival horror roots. On the other side of the fence, the character of Alice provided an example of a strong female protagonist that many fans of the franchise adored. Let's talk about the infamous church scene, for instance. Alice crashes through a stained glass window on a motorcycle, shoots a zombie dog midair, and takes out a horde of zombies without breaking a sweat. Sure, it looks cool, but it's the kind of over-the-top spectacle that made some fans roll their eyes. It is a bit jarring compared to what we see of her in the first film. A common criticism by viewers is on the wardrobe of the characters, specifically the women, Alice, Jill, and Terry, which was regarded as fan service and highly impractical in a zombie apocalypse, as the clothing exposes too much skin. In the game Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, the excuse is that Jill was ambushed in her apartment by zombies and didn't have time to change clothes, while in the movie it seems she and Alice purposely dressed the way they did, though in Terry's case, her choice of clothing is a pencil skirt and blouse, her job uniform as a reporter, and it's slightly more justified as she had planned to evacuate Raccoon City before the gates had been shut down. Anticipating this criticism, it was Milla Jovovich's idea about having the heat wave in Raccoon City as the reason why her character, Jill Valentine, and Terry Morales are wearing very few clothes. Unfortunately, the shoot was in November in Toronto, and the cold weather made the shooting troublesome for the actors. The other supporting characters of LJ and Carlos had their own signature moments peppered in throughout the movie. Carlos in particular struck a chord with fans and returned in Resident Evil Extinction. LJ provided the comedic relief and actually took the role over for Snoop Dogg when he wasn't able to commit due to scheduling issues. Terry's behavior was more obnoxious and self-centered in the original cut of the film, as confirmed by the shooting script and deleted scenes. One example is an extended version of the news station scene where she starts acting like a prima donna and demanding a quote fucking cappuccino when the camera stopped rolling. These scenes were cut down presumably to make her more sympathetic. A small subplot featuring her taking Umbrella prescription medication was also cut for pacing reasons. Although Nemesis is the iconic antagonist of Jill Valentine in the third Resident Evil game, the two never actually fight or conflict in the film, as nearly all the encounters with Nemesis occur with Alice. The closest they ever get to actually fighting is when he guns down STARS member Peyton, Jill's friend and partner, and then she opens fire on him before taking cover, and Alice proceeds to attack him after telling Jill and Terry to escape. Speaking of which, let's talk more about Nemesis, one of the most iconic villains in the franchise. In the games, he's absolutely terrifying, a relentless, nearly indestructible force that stalks the player throughout Resident Evil 3. In the movie, Nemesis is more of a tragic figure. His origins as Matt Addison, the character from the first film, aimed to add emotional weight, but this change removes much of what made him scary. And let's not forget the clunky fight choreography during his final battle with Alice, which feels much more like a WWE match than a climactic showdown. Fun fact, the Nemesis suit was entirely practical, worn by actor Matthew G. Taylor. While it looked impressive on screen, the heavy suit reportedly made it difficult for him to move, which explains some of the stiffer action scenes. Although never mentioned in the film, promotional material reveals that Alice's last name is Abernathy. This was intended to merely be a fake identity for the former Umbrella agent and not the character's real name. This explains why Umbrella officers usually call her Project Alice, both in this film and the subsequent sequels. A fake newspaper clipping released as a promotional item for the film also revealed that Alice was simply a code name and her real name was Janice Prospero, and her disappearance prompted her family to start a search for her, as her family was never mentioned in the films, and Resident Evil, the final chapter in 2016, reveals that she's simply a clone of Umbrella co-owner Alice Marcus. This backstory can either be taken as non-canon or a retcon. Number 3. Horror or action. The opening sequence showing the rapid spread of the T-virus through Raccoon City is one of the movie's strongest moments. It captures the chaos and fear of a zombie outbreak, with scenes of streets descending into madness and Umbrella Corporation's cold response. To be honest, this was the movie's closest resemblance to the games and what they stand for: absolute terror falling into a pit of chaos. When we look at the school scene where the survivors encounter zombie children, this is genuinely creepy and one of the few moments where the movie leans into horror. It's a brief reminder of what the film could have been if it focused more on scares than stunts. Many critics complain about how female characters in the first 2 or 3 Resident Evil films were sexualized, like how Alice and Jill wear very revealing clothes despite the fact that most of it was actually game accurate, like Jill's outfit, or how they were all still strong characters no matter how they looked or dressed. But compared to how titillating some of the earlier attempts at film adaptation were, the films were actually quite tame when it comes to any real sexual or nudity scenes. One script, for example, had scenes such as Jill having her blue top ripped off by a zombie during struggle with it, which revealed her breast, and others went so far to include far more gratuitous nudity. It feels as if the filmmakers were in an almost constant struggle with the balance of how far to push the envelope. This might be the biggest aspect of the debate for Resident Evil Apocalypse. Was the action angle helpful to it, or did it lead the franchise down a negative road that it was never able to recover from? Number 4. The finale. The climactic showdown between Alice and Nemesis tries to be emotional but falls flat for many. The decision to humanize Nemesis by making him hesitate during their fight undermines his role as a relentless monster. The connection between Alice and Matt in the first film was fairly casual and did not bring enough weight to elicit strong emotions to this conflict. Perhaps if they spent more time covering his transformation and Alice witnessing it, then maybe the viewer could be more invested. The survivors barely make their way to the chopper and everything else is lost. The shot at the end of the movie where we see the nuke flying above a pack of wandering zombies in Raccoon City is taken directly from the ending of the third Resident Evil game. In the final scene, Alice wakes up in an aquatic incubator where she hears Angie's telepathic call. This implies that only the individuals who managed to bond successfully with the T-virus on a cellular level without any side effects are the only ones capable of developing supernatural powers like telepathy. Truth be told, this finale was beyond insane in how the story was ending. Superpowers, incubators, less zombies to care about. The transition had me puzzled then as it does now. No balance, nonsensical, way over the top, liar. Number 5. Legacy. The film is included on the film critic Roger Ebert's most hated list. He was so disgusted by this film that he refused to review any more films in the Resident Evil film series. He wrote in his scathing review of this film, quote, "The movie is an utterly meaningless waste of time. Parents, if you encounter teenagers who say they like this movie, do not let them date your children." End quote. Despite the criticism, Resident Evil Apocalypse was a commercial success, grossing over $129 million worldwide on a $45 million budget. This, of course, was good news for this newly born franchise. The films would continue, each trying to outdo the last and building on the Alice arc in this zombie-infested world. It's totally fair to consider this film and the franchise as a guilty pleasure, but perhaps that was its greatest weapon. Resident Evil found a way to differentiate itself apart from all of the other zombie films. It made its own mark on the subgenre, and for that, even the most disappointed video game fans have to applaud it. But at the end of the day, Resident Evil Apocalypse made the non-video game character of Alice an even more zombie ass-kicking, sometimes even more half-naked badass babe, and we as fans must deal with it in our own way. You have to ask yourself, was Resident Evil Apocalypse a good movie? Was it the start of a great franchise for you? Is it flawed, or was it a great zombie flick? Does it have too much action, or was it a standout in the subgenre for zombie films? That is a question only you can answer. As always, this video is not here to make you love Resident Evil Apocalypse, or to hate it. It's simply a discussion to highlight the history and aspects of it, good or bad, with you, the viewer. So what do you think? Are you a fan of Resident Evil Apocalypse? If so, tell us why. If not, let's discuss why you hate Resident Evil Apocalypse. If you haven't hit the like button for more content, please do. If you're not subscribed to the Night Watch Zone, this is the time to do it and become part of this fantastic movie community where you'll never love and talk about movies the same. If you like this video, check out my other Why You Hate videos and other content, including live streams here, and I'll see you there. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, you are the Night Watch. Peace.